This is Net Video coming to you from Sydney, Australia. I'm Jason Romney. We're talking to Martin Dalgleish today, who is the CEO of PBL's Convergent Media. Martin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a bit about what you do here?
Sure. Well, my title here is CEO of Convergence, but what that effectively means is I look at really the emergent business models and technologies and impacts on the traditional media models of which PBL currently competes, and then extrapolates that into a strategy for how PBL continues to position itself as the leader in the future media consumption landscape.
The deal that's been announced between Optus and NineMSN, tell us what you hope to achieve from that.
Well, that's a pretty important deal on a number of fronts. So let me go back to kind of first principles to explain it, and then I'll indicate to where I see the future lay. I think firstly, there is a clear opportunity for the telco model and the media model to converge. And how it converges is critical in the respect to future business models. I'm of the view that the intersection of those domains, telco and media, is best handled by partnership or alliancing, rather than the telco company expanding its horizons, or indeed the other way, the media company expanding its own horizons. Partnering is a logical advantage for both companies to bring together their respective competencies to create compelling consumer propositions. So that marriage of telco and media is fundamentally important. The question in the Australian market was, from PBL's standpoint, through NineMSN, who do we partner with? Optus, to its benefit, really had a clear vision in respect to a view on how that partnering model would work. It was largely based on some of the models that we were viewing in markets like the UK and the US. But where this model stands apart is it's probably the first time that the model has gone beyond broadband and into the mobile world. So the real advantage of the Optus NineMSN connection is not so much that Optus will receive its broadband content from NineMSN and broadband services from NineMSN. It's the point where the consumer now will have a single seamless interface on their broadband portal and their mobile. And that's the power of that relationship. How big that will be and how impactful that will all be determined in due course. Clearly for Optus, it's about customer acquisition and retention. For PBL and NineMSN, it's about giving us a wider audience and a deeper audience connection with our content and services.
So I suppose then, in order to offer that seamless experience across all the different devices and platforms, you need to be able to identify a visitor, you need to authenticate them, and then offer them a seamless billing process across all those platforms. Is that one of the key parts of the value proposition of this alliance?
Effectively, that's what Optus will do. They'll take that accountability within the value chain, so they will manage the customer relationship. So imagine yourself, Jason, as a broadband customer. You will be presented a window to the world that is Jason Romney's. You'll have the ability to personalise and customise that. For example, you might say that you follow a particular AFL team, or you're interested in particular stock quotes, or here is your buddy list as you're an active messenger user, and here is your contact database that you typically would use in Outlook. All of that will then be managed by, if you like, a control panel on the PC, and then that will translate into your mobile experience such that you only enter that data once, and it carries forward into both delivery devices. That's pretty important in terms of building then a converged world for Jason Romney. And it's that high level of personalisation and authentication that's pretty vital to the whole model's future.
One of the emerging buzzwords of the online world is the idea of presence, so that people who pop up as a user of a particular device on a particular platform at a certain time become visible to all their friends on the network. And that has great significance for things like video conferencing or instant messaging, or even the matter of making revisions to Word documents and having the audit trail present itself in a way that allows you to contact someone who made a change in a business environment. Is the idea of presence, as Microsoft sees it, part of both the existing Windows platform today and the future Vista platform that's just been announced, the rebadged Longhorn? Is that going to be a significant part of the combined offering, so that people's presence is better announced and better exploited across all the different devices?
Well, I should be fair and probably not speak for Microsoft, given they are, of course, our partner in NineMSN, but I shouldn't really talk too positively about their future product roadmap and landscape, only in that that's really their territory and questions you should rightfully ask them at an appropriate point. But I would reasonably expect that the concept of presence, as you've defined it, is a very integral part of that proposition moving forward. Now, I think a lot of that can be delivered today via Messenger, and the development teams in Redmond working with Optus and their product development people will be working on that tight integration, so presence will be very much a fundamental part of that future product delivery. Beyond that, I think it's a very pertinent question to talk to Microsoft in terms of their product roadmap.
The Austar pay TV satellite set-top box apparently going to have a digital tuner built in so that people can receive the DVB-T transmissions of the terrestrial broadcasters on the same box as they receive their pay TV satellite transmissions from Austar in regional areas. Is that box, therefore, a candidate for spearheading interactivity on the Nine Network's terrestrial content?
Is interactivity a valued capability in a digital TV service? That's the foundation of the question. From a consumer standpoint, irrespective on the ability to deliver that, irrespective on whether it's MHP, DVB, open, whatever, they're just as to that process. At this point, interactivity is highly contained to be relevant to certain types of content genres or applications. So the experience of Fox Sports, for example, in interactivity as an overlay to the Rugby League or the AFL broadcast has been very strong, and clearly there's an element of interactivity that's already being delivered over Sky News, and there's now with Foxtel a process by which interactivity in advertising is being well explored, all with reasonable degrees of success based on whatever criteria they're evaluating those models from. It's still very nascent as an industry. Largely, consumers are still very reliant on that lean-back experience of receiving programming in a linear fashion. And I think that will be around for some time. So I'm not personally bullish about the future of interactivity. Therefore, the question around the technology and the enablement and whether Austar's technology gives us the impetus to do that, for me, is a bit of an irrelevancy. For me, it's more about we can enter that market and resurrect that market, if you like, at the point where we see that there is a compelling need for interactivity as a means of user engagement. Today, I don't think that compelling need is as strong as what it possibly can be in the future. And that's why we've probably elected to take more of a easing of our strategy in that particular scenario.
Well, up to now, a lot of the interactivity that's been wrapped around terrestrial television has been provided through mobile phone handsets and SMS competitions and polls and the like.
Yep.
But with this NineMSN Optus hookup, the spectre of the Microsoft Windows Media Center once again comes up. Is that a technology that the Optus NineMSN alliance might be exploiting now?
That's not specific to the purpose of the Optus NineMSN alliance. It's not anything that we have discussed with Optus in to any great degree. It's a model that we are very familiar with through Microsoft as our partners. I think, again, that's a very early model in respect to that technology. I think inherently, though, my personal view is that there has to be, for that type of service to work as a control mechanism for a TV, it has to be a TV-like experience, and that means full plug and play, has to have a form factor that looks like it belongs in the lounge room. So that boundary between PC and TV is still very difficult territory, and although Windows Media Center and Microsoft Media Center is exploring in that space, I think the model still has a long way to go. The technology has a long way to go to develop, so we get it right from a consumer standpoint. So as and when that occurs, or as we're comfortable, or as Optus as consumers, at the end of the day, it's really, they're the key in this whole value chain. If they say this is a compelling part of what they need, then we can build that in. And our partnership with Microsoft will allow us to explore those type of emergent opportunities.
So Helen Coonan has recently announced dramatic changes in the context of the foreign and cross-media ownership regulations, and indeed the issue of multi-channeling. Now, Nine, as I understand it, has traditionally been opposed to multi-channeling, but it looks like multi-channeling at this stage at least is on its way in. What are the implications of that for PBL Convergent Media?
Well, firstly, we do remain opposed to multi-channeling, you're quite right, and that's been our position consistently over the years. That remains our position. I think there is some media speculation today on Helen Coonan's view. I think that is media speculation. They're really taking that from various sources. We've obviously had dialogue with Helen Coonan in recent weeks and months. We continue to have that dialogue. I think it's a bit premature to say that multi-channeling might be back in. So for now, we remain pretty firmly opposed to that because simply it's not a viable commercial model in the Australian market context.
So why are 9 and 10 opposed to multi-channeling? Is it because in a multi-channeling environment, audiences are fragmented, which dilutes the traditional business model of the broadcasters, or is there a wider context?
No, I think you just said it beautifully. We are a market of 20 million people. We're not a market of 100 million or 50 million. We are very different from other markets. So you can't simply take a UK experience and translate that into Australian context. You have to consider the wider economic issues around what works in the Australian market context, how the models are deployed, and how the models are supported. And so we presented our evidence to Senator Helen Coonan on multiple occasions and in the appropriate form that indicates multi-channeling for us exactly is what you've just incurred. It really is a model that can't support the current advertising base in Australia.
That's something which is slightly challenging to understand in the sense that it's always been the business model of both the big global media brands like the Yahoos and Googles, but also the integrated media houses like PBL, which has so many different assets now, that visitors who come to your content or services across all the different devices you command in your artillery, they can be aggregated into a total advertising value proposition for prospective advertisers. And surely it would be the case that if there was multi-channeling, even though perhaps a portion of your overall audience would now be watching another of your own channels, couldn't you sort of just sum the audiences of the two channels or more channels together and still maintain that huge, attractive TV audience?
Well, I think first and foremost, let's stand back from the issue around multi-channeling and talk about aggregation of audience, because you've raised 2 points in that question. So firstly, we present multiple platforms for people's media consumption, and so we represent to a client base, an advertiser base in Australia, an opportunity to reach an audience, a defined audience across multiple platforms, and we have a sales process where we offer converged solutions, if you like, to those advertisers or those media buyers today, and that's working very effectively. We do that more progressively. We're finding that becoming a far more demanding need of the marketplace, and certainly in the last 12 months that's even further been evidenced in Australia. So there is this need for people to reach audiences via multiple forms, multiple platforms, but they all play different parts. TV has a very different role to play to online. The creativity and the proposition is usually defined specific to those mediums. And we work in a converged solution sense with either the advertiser or the media buyer to package that up. Back to your core of your question around multi-channeling, to the extent that, can't you just simply aggregate that as an audience? Well, potentially you could, but you think about how brand campaigns work from the standpoint of delivering a solution to a particular target market. Reach and frequency are the two primary drivers of that, reach being a very key one, and they're looking for a commitment and a firm indication of what the reach attributes will be of a particular programming buy. We can deliver that today with the knowledge of our history of our business, and there is a very proven model in doing that. The fragmentation of that into multiple channels has to come at some risk, and we have to incur a significantly higher cost in either acquiring or producing the content that has to fill that available channel. It doesn't drive any more advertising money, and that's the key. So if you increase the cost base dramatically, 2 channels rather than 1, on the same advertising base, and you've got a mismatch in terms of the economic model of multi-channeling.
So, by that logic then, do you see the delivery of TV-style content to mobile phones as being just another kind of multi-channeling that's going to cost you more to buy the rights and indeed package them into a attractive product? Or do you see it as a significantly different kind of user experience and distribution path that you can actually make a significant profit on to the point where it's desirable to go in that direction?
Well, I think at this stage we don't know to whether it's the former or the latter. Mobile broadcasting, DVB-H, is one such technology being trialled today by the Bridge Networks. We're a partner to that trial. The trial has only just commenced in the last week. A trial will take a good 12 months in order to go through a proper technical trial evaluation in terms of the product efficacy. the in-building frequency and reach, and the user experience around DVB-H. How will users consume that content? And then the question that also arises out of DVB-H is, what is the commercial model? And none of that has been answered globally. There are a number of trials on DVB-H today in the UK, in the US, Singapore, France, many others. There are different degrees of progress, but as yet there is no clear and evident commercial model that's resulted from that. We're very open-minded about what that commercial model will be, but we simply don't know yet. So we have to go through the trial. We have to understand really critically that consumption and look at how consumers want to access linear video over a mobile device. Do they want to access linear video? How will they want to access that? And are they prepared to pay for that? And what is the basis of that payment model? And once we understand that from the trial experience, then we can begin to determine if that's compelling for Nine and PBL or not. And it may be that's just a question of time, or that may be that technology remains an impediment to any successful deployment.
Martin, the Foxtel IQ digital video recorder has been out in the marketplace for some time now, but have you had the opportunity to assess how people are watching, say, the content of the Nine network?
Well, I have an IQ box at home, so I talk as a user, and I think it's fantastic. You know, it is a box that gives me the ability to very quickly assess the content I like to watch, and the ability to store and record that content and watch that in a recorded stream. Now, every user is different in respect to PVRs around the world, and PVRs are still, again, a fairly early technology. The deployment of PVRs in Australia, be it the IQ box or any other box, is still very small numbers. And that will change. I mean, there's no doubt that PVRs over time will become a much more dominant device, and we'll see a lot more of them. We've seen that in the UK, currently penetrated 4% of homes, reputed to be going to 20% in the next 4 or 5 years. Let's see if that occurs. But as that does occur, the question that arises, as you've rightfully raised in your question, is what does that mean in terms of the user experience and the interrelationship they have with the content? And particularly, what does that mean in respect to the recording stream and the future of the advertising model? It's interesting because it's still highly speculated about the impact of what they refer as ad wastage. And of course, ad wastage is really a sort of combination of all factors. It's whether people are watching a recorded stream and whether they're actually skipping or fast-forwarding through the ads. Now, we've been effectively in a world where there's been a potential for ad wastage ever since the advent of television, because while there is an advert or a commercial break, people can go off and do other things, make a cup of tea, go to the bathroom, whatever it may be, and that's the same thing. And yet we've always understood that world, and that's taken into consideration when people are planning their media buys. I don't think today PVRs changes that landscape at all. I think that PVRs arguably have more of a benefit than a risk, in that people with PVRs are typically consuming more time on TV because they're watching more content. So there is a secondary benefit that's arising from that. How that develops in the passing of time is one of those great questions that we'll all pontificate on and speculate on, but I think I'd rather see the firm evidence. I've got nothing personally from the Foxtel experience yet which gives me any great clarity on that, but over time, as that develops, we fully expect to get a much clearer picture on the impact that PVRs has, opportunity and risk.
Various constituents torpedoed Ziggy Switkowski's attempt to do a deal with Fairfax, but there's recently been speculation that PBL might sell its assets, its media assets, into Fairfax and take a 30 or 40% stake in Fairfax. What sort of synergies would drive shareholder value if that were to occur?
Look, I can't talk to any hypotheticals because, again, that's part of the fairly rampant speculation that's around the media at the moment in respect to possible affiliations and synergies and so on. So I really can't talk to any specifics on that, as you would appreciate. I think clearly, any media affiliation from one platform to another that doesn't exist today, you would seriously want to look at and understand what those synergy benefits are, but I can only really talk to specific opportunities as they arise.
What's your thinking on local media companies surviving the assault now from the big global media company brands, the Yahoos, the Googles and so on, which have the capacity to generate revenues on a global basis and who have the technologies to provide the kind of value proposition that you're going to be offering with the Optus NineMSN deal, for example?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair question. clearly we're very thrilled that we're partners with MSN in the NineMSN vehicle. And NineMSN now is coming on to almost 10 years old, so it's a very proven business model. It's hugely successful in the Australian market. It captures, the majority of market share in the display advertising market. It's the number one site by reach in Australia, bar none. So, it is a great success for Nine and a great success for MSN and Microsoft, and demonstrates that technology and that marriage to content is a really critical piece. But you can't view technology for the sake of technology. It's really back to the user, it's back to the consumer. So it's about progressing forward with new technologies, new delivery models, new commercial models that make sense only on the basis that there's a consumer on the other end of that who values what it is you're doing. Now, I think we've been fortunate in working with Microsoft and MSN in particular through the development of NineMSN that we've done that in a very sensible, paced way over the last 9-10 years. We've understood that business as it's developed. We've come out the other end of a dot-com crash with a really good, viable, profitable growth business. And NineMSN's got a great future in that. So we're uniquely placed. But we also understand that as the world develops and the consumption into mobile becomes increasingly important, and the introduction of 3G in Australia in late 2005, aside from Hutchison's already formidable customer base, will be an important inflection point in development of content to mobile devices, that the way we retool the organisation in respect to content creation, aggregation and publishing across multiple platforms becomes an increasingly important issue. Because we've had NineMSN as a very formidable part of our model for the last 9 years, we've really figured out how to do that, and the extension into the mobile world for us will be a little bit less painful than what it will be for other media companies who haven't got that online experience.
Cliff Rosenberg, the managing director of Yahoo, was quoted in the press recently saying that as broadband penetration in Australia rises above 50% by 2008, that the big cashed-up overseas-based companies are going to sweep in. How do you think Australian companies like Seek can survive in that context?
Well, I think, again, let's dissect your question on a number of fronts. Firstly, broadband is the driver of a whole new world and habit of consumption of content. And at broadband, as I read yesterday, Nielsen stating that more than 60% of internet homes now have broadband in Australia. A year ago it was 30. So we're on this steep curve. And that's a fantastic driver for the content industry, because the consumption of content for a broadband user is fundamentally very different from the consumption of content for a narrowband user. Narrowband users typically would dial in once or twice a day for 20 minutes. It was very utilitarian in its delivery. It was news, weather information, email, and get off again. Broadband is about multiple access during the day, shorter attention, much more entertainment-led, and therefore creates a much richer opportunity for a media company and a content company like us to take advantage of that access. So that's first and foremost. Clearly also now the importance of search moving forward, and the extension of search into other models is becoming a critical part. Now, we're seeing at the moment a really interesting wave of graphical, cadastral, local search type models. MSN, for example, last night launched Virtual Earth. A few weeks ago, Google launched a product called Google Earth. They're both very much at almost beta stage of development in respect to their presentation, but they are presenting really unique new ways to create compelling technologies that allow a user, again, to get value through a local search. And I think that's a fantastic example of how the world is going to change. Now, what's critical from that is that the type of technologies that are demonstrated by both MSN Virtual Earth and Google Earth are significant high R&D type activities that can only really be justified on a global basis. So it's how companies like us embrace those global technologies and opportunities and build them into our local model using local content that is absolutely more relevant to people like Jason and Martin, and build that converging the best of both is, I think, where the winning game can be done. And clearly from PBL's standpoint, we think we're really well positioned there, because we think we have the best local content of any media company in Australia, because we have ACP with more than 50% reach in the magazine publishing market. We have Channel 9 as the number one broadcaster. We have NineMSN as the number one online site in Australia. And that's a pretty unique portfolio that's very rich and very deep and very broad. So it's that merger of global, best of local together, demonstrating a powerful model.
Fairfax's Ravel recently observed that he thought that the fact that people in their teens and in their 20s weren't reading newspapers so much anymore was okay, because once they got a job, got married, bought a car, bought a house, and became people with those sorts of responsibilities, they would undoubtedly be reading newspapers again.
Well, I think there's a number of studies that I've seen that indicate that it really is a trend line that's relevant to all demographies, all age groups. And clearly, though, the youth market, the 8 to 18-year-old market, if you like, it's even further exacerbated. I mean, that market is very attuned to new devices. They're very savvy on technology, and they're clearly less inclined to use traditional media than profiles like you or me. Will they change their habits? I think that's a big call to make, that they will then suddenly transform from being technology savvy, technology dependent people and shift to traditional models, and perhaps at the same time pop the slippers on and sit in their recliner rockers. You know, I think what we're seeing now is a fundamental shift in media consumption. The good news is that not all media is being penalised by that. Some of the traditional media actually is still getting a higher net usage than historically. It's just as a percentage of their media consumption, it's going down slightly because the overall media consumption, particularly of the younger skewed market, is going up. They're using more media, but they're using more media because they're much more active in online music, in iPods, in their use of SMS, their use of instant messenger, much more than you or I was when we were of that age. So it's not penalising to everybody, but newspaper circulation as a market is clearly experiencing some difficulty. That's a global issue. It's not just an Australian issue. It's more relevant to the business titles, and if you like the broadsheet titles, they tend to be more impacted than more of the tabloid type titles or publications. And so I think the newspaper industry is responding to that. We're seeing the Times, for example, in the UK, has moved from being a broadsheet midweek to a tabloid form as a demonstration of that fact, and they seem to have had an uplift in readership as a result, as I understand. So there is responses that the industry can make. They've just got to be very active and very engaged and very appreciative of what the underlying consumption models are. To think that that potentially is a short-term issue and they all will be well in the long run, I think is probably being a little bit short-sighted.
The PBL Crown Casino assets, as yet, for all sorts of reasons, haven't been moved into the online space. Is that something that we'll see on cell phones and more online from PBL?
I think that largely depends on a number of factors. One, again, the demand from Australians for that type of service and opportunity. Two is there's clearly a whole number of regulatory issues to consider in that market. It's a complex market. It's not just a single market. There are many facets to that. So there's no simple answer to your question. You know, we will work within the regulatory regimes that exist of the day, and as relevant opportunities arise to present content in those forms, we'll do that. And to this day, we haven't, as you've described. We've clearly made a statement in respect to Betfair and the joint venture that's been formed, and that in itself, I think, is a model that, subject to it getting a license in Australia, will be a very successful model, as it's already been shown in the UK. And that model in itself, potentially has extendability into other delivery platforms as well.
Does PBL regard blogging to be a significant new chapter in online media opening up and something that it can make money from, or just a kind of short-lived fad?
No, I think blogging is a really interesting phenomenon, and one that we will see for a long time coming and will only continue to grow. I guess we have exposure to it through NineMSN, and MSN, of course, have a very successful product called MSN Spaces, which I understand has some 17 odd million users globally who already have established their own blogs, and there's a community of bloggers, and of course blogs being established for really any content genre or issue in the marketplace. It's actually fundamentally important, not because it's just a voice of the individual, but because it's changing the nature of the traffic that is driven into a traditional display ad model like NineMSN. So there's a concept called the tail of the web. And traditionally, the Pareto effect would apply. The top 10 sites on the web would account for a vast proportion of the total page traffic. But with the advent of blogging, you're seeing that concentration factor come further out. And that presents an opportunity for companies like NineMSN to understand which of those blogs is gaining a reasonable reach in respect to how it pulls those sites or opportunities into the wider NineMSN network, and they're things that we'll continue to explore.
Martin Dalgleish, CEO of PBL Convergent Media, thank you very much for coming on Net Video today.
My pleasure.